While the spotlight of public opinion shines very brightly on students' educational experiences and outcomes, it is a significant and often overlooked fact that intentionally supporting the learning and growth of adults throughout the system has a direct and positive influence on student achievement. To put it another way, it's really becoming increasingly clear that co-prioritizing and supporting adult development in schools and districts, as well as that of students, can help educators of all kinds grow the internal capacities needed to more effectively teach and lead in our current and future education milieus. When we talk about supporting adult growth and internal capacity, we're referring to increases in our cognitive, affective, interpersonal, and intrapersonal capacities. Those capacities that enable us to better manage the complexities of leading and teaching and learning and living in general. Given the increasingly adaptive challenges we encounter in schools and school systems every day, there's an urgent need to help adults to develop the internal capacities needed to better manage these complex developmental demands. Hopefully, as we move through this program, you will begin to have the capacity to courageously support adult growth in real-life practice, anywhere that you're caring for adult professional or personal development. Adult development involves expanding the cognitive, affective, interpersonal, and intrapersonal capacities. These vital capacities help us to take a greater perspective on ourselves, on others, and the systems we live and work in. They help us to connect more deeply and meaningfully with colleagues and other stakeholders, such as team members, collaborators, leaders, and community members. And they help us to continue to learn, to teach, to lead, and adapt as the world around us changes and evolves. We've all had those aha moments when we realize something new about ourselves, about someone else, or the world. When these things happen, we uncover a previously unknown aspect of the way things are, were, or work. We suddenly see things we thought we understood in an entirely new light. Sometimes this is exhilarating, sometimes painful, mundane, or even profound. These realizations can be gifts that fuel momentum and the deepest kinds of learning. They're also what we mean when we talk about perspective taking as the key ingredient of capacity building. Taking perspective on education, it seems clear that we have some work and perspective taking to do to better affect change in these systems. Despite the hard work, the care, and the noble efforts of so many educators, including yourselves, and the equally equity-oriented rhetoric that frames most new policies and reform initiatives, far too many students still face unfair and consequential gaps in educational opportunity. And this isn't just a school problem. A quick look beyond the schoolhouse walls makes it clear that inequalities of all kinds are, in fact, deeply human societal challenges. Schools are mirrors of our deepest cultural complexities and inconsistencies, and we need to surface and confront our personal and institutional blind spots to take a better and greater perspective on them if we hope to change them. After all, if we cannot see, understand, or recognize our own individual and collective assumptions, they will continue to run and to drive us. The promise, then, of perspective taking resides in the knowledge that the way things are, the way we are at any given moment in time, is not inevitable or immutable. Change can happen, and it does. But first we must galvanize the courage to face ourselves, our world, and the challenges we encounter with clear eyes, compassion, and above all, a growth mindset. These days it can seem like collaboration is in the air we breathe. It is a defining part of the new normal of modern day life. Research about leadership and teacher learning overwhelmingly suggests that adult collaboration is essential to building internal capacity, improving instructional practice, and positively influencing student outcomes. Research also suggests that collaboration can help educators significantly increase their effectiveness over time and help them to stay in the field, even when working in high-challenge contexts. Collaboration is consistently emerging as one of the best ways we can help each other to navigate the challenges and opportunities of teaching, leading, and learning. Formal and informal opportunities to come together, however, sometimes end up being rather uncollaborative, even when individuals begin with the best of intentions. Meaningful and purposeful collaboration, which is profoundly worth it and deeply needed, can be incredibly difficult. We need more than just time allotted in our schedules for collaborative work. On the intrapersonal and interpersonal levels, we also need practice and more complex internal capacities to open ourselves and our perspectives to new ideas, to share what we really think and feel, to turn toward conflict and pain points in our relationships rather than away from them, and to build bridges in our lives and communities. In other words, collaboration requires logistical coordination and courageous vulnerability to engage in genuinely and authentically with and for each other. We need this kind of authentic dialogue, connection, and collaboration to grow and to do our best work. I'm particularly fond of this quote, "The world is always changing, and so we have to change too." I think, as educators, we know that just as if we were going to take a decade-old lesson plan and dust it off, it will not quite cut it when we have a new group of learners in front of us. We know that really and truly, we can't rest on our laurels or on the comfort of our current meaning making when we're trying to influence the future, right? And as leaders, we're going to be striving for change to the future. So the whole terrain of our educational world and its growing complexity is shifting, and it's growing larger, really much too quickly. And children and adults in our care deserve and need more from us. Learning is never just a one-off endeavor. It's something we pursue and we savor as it takes different shapes and forms throughout our lives. And as John Dewey back in 1916 said, growth is not something which is completed in odd moments. It is continuous, and it leads us into the future. So the key takeaways for moving forward are that perspective taking involves seeing more about ourselves, others, society, and the relationships among those entities, and taking perspective can help us to better affect change. Because each of us can only see what we can see and know what we can know, we need other people in order to learn and develop. Collaboration, therefore, is essential to both perspective taking and internal capacity development. And finally, learning, like educational change and improvement, is an ongoing and never-ending process of discovery. As individuals and organizations, we are really never done learning or growing. So through a developmental approach to learning and building capacity, we're going to be able to recognize and infuse the concept of growth into our work and into the systems of our schools. When anyone asks a local real estate office what makes the difference in the selling price of a home, you'll often hear the answer, location, location, location. I'd like to suggest that in building a professional learning culture, success relies on relationships, relationships, relationships. Although culture has multiple meanings at every level of education, I'd like to use it here to describe the everyday norms, the values, and the beliefs that permeate the behavior, traditions, and rituals of a school, a district, or an organization. It's how we think, it's how we feel, and how we act together, collectively, individually, and up and down and across the system. Culture sits at the heart of individual systems of change, and cultivating a positive culture is one of the key responsibilities of educational leaders. After all, people grow and learn best when they feel good. Pinpointing what makes a culture work or not work can be hard to do. And so we're going to look at practical takeaways, things you can employ to build and enhance a growth-oriented culture at your school, at your district, and at any level of your system. The term holding environment was originally coined by a pediatrician and psychiatrist named Donald W. Winnicott back in 1965. Winnicott used that term, holding environment, to describe the evolving care young children need as they grow out of infancy. In our situation, we're going to talk about the term holding environment to refer to the fluid combination of supports and challenges we need in our roles and relationships to flourish and to increase our internal capacities. In 1982, Robert Keegan extended Winnicott's usage and said that we actually need this kind of holding throughout our lifespans. Now, we have discussed how adults with different ways of knowing will feel supported and challenged by different things because they make sense of their responsibilities and relationships in different ways. So, as you may suspect, this has tremendous implications for the way we shape, cultivate, sustain, and experience holding environments that support internal capacity building. And then, of course, the goal being that we want to increase perspective taking, collaboration, and continuous learning. A holding environment can be a personal or a professional relationship, a series of relationships, a team, a school, a district, a program, family, or a complex system. Research suggests that we may need a constellation of holding environments to really best learn, grow, and thrive. So if we look at it from this perspective, and the illustration on this slide, we might even argue that culture is essentially the sum total of holding environments we experience. Building a growth-oriented professional culture then would involve fostering and nurturing many overlapping holding environments for diverse stakeholders, and it would require a commitment to maintain those environments over time and adjust them as individuals grow and change. In Drago-Severson's research, she has learned that looking at culture through a developmental lens can help us more intentionally shape contexts at every level so that they can serve a more meaningful holding environment for growth. Taking a greater perspective on our different holding environments can help us to begin to see culture not as immutable, but malleable, as a byproduct of history, circumstance, and when we're fortunate enough in our own hard work, it can be involved. Both macro and micro levels of culture is something we inherit and create, and it's something that shapes us, but we can also shape that in turn. And that gives us great hope in leading cultures for change. It's important to understand that, developmentally speaking, holding environments serve three key functions. First, they meet us where we are in our learning, growing, and way of knowing without any urgent press for change. This means that holding environments honor a person's or a group's inherent value and intentionally offer supports that will feel most meaningful to that person or group in the moment. Second, as we often intuitively do for children and adolescents, holding environments will also challenge adults' growing edges in order to help them begin to develop new, more complex internal capacities. In many ways, this is very similar to Vygotsky's conceptualization of working in the zone of proximal development. The big idea here is to offer just enough challenge to a person or a group in order to safely promote growth. Third, holding environments stay in place with both consistency and flexibility as people within them demonstrate new internal capacities. Just as we wouldn't offer the same supports and challenges to a toddler as we would to an infant or a teenager as we would to a young child, the contexts that we create for adults need to change as we grow. A strong holding environment for a teacher who's just growing out of a socializing way of knowing would be different from a strong holding environment for a seasoned superintendent who's stretching beyond self-authoring capacities. And that same would hold true for adults in every same role that happens to make meaning with different ways of knowing. So for teams with different levels of comfort and experience, it would be the same. The big idea here is that no matter whom we are working with, we need to differentiate the supports and challenges we offer so we can best honor the other's needs, experiences, whether it's individually or collectively. In research that was conducted by Drago-Severson and her colleagues, trust, safety, and respect have emerged as vital preconditions for supporting growth and capacity building. In order to build effective holding environments that can serve the three functions of trust, safety, and respect, we know that it's just indispensable. Trust, safety, and respect help a person feel supported and developmentally challenged over time. And as you may suspect, they really do tie into the elements of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In that sense, these preconditions form the bedrock of any growth-oriented holding environment or culture, and they have a central place in the building of a capacity system-wide. When preconditions
of trust, safety, and respect are genuinely woven into the fabric of a relationship, of a group, of an organization, or a system, for example, a team, a school, or a district, we know it. We can actually feel it and sense it and appreciate it, and it makes all the difference. Just as in one-to-one relationships, the preconditions of trust, safety, and respect are vital within professional teams and large organizational contexts as well. Without these preconditions, we really can't support the internal capacity building in others. And without these preconditions, it's hard for us to grow at any level of a system. Although the importance of trust and safety and respect has been well documented in educational literature, it's also important to remember that adults will attune differently to these preconditions depending on their way of knowing. Over the last several weeks, I've referenced Dr. Ellie Drago-Severson in several of the presentations we've talked about, and you can see that she's cited in the references of almost every one of the presentations. Full disclosure is that she is a very dear and close friend of mine. I'd like to take this opportunity to pause here and have you listen to her on this short YouTube presentation that she made at Teachers College, where she is a professor. It's about 8 minutes long, but I think it will help you to understand a little bit about the difference between transformative and transformational learning. It will also recap some of what we've talked about in terms of ways of knowing. There are no hard and fast rules about what constitutes trust, safety, and respect for adults who make meaning with any way of knowing. But it can be helpful to consider colleagues' developmental preferences for the preconditions in big, broad strokes as you think more about how are we going to differentiate your leadership to support growth with developmental intentionality. In light of this particular chart offers a general overview of how adults with instrumental, socializing, self-authoring, and self-transforming ways of knowing may orient to the preconditions. Hopefully, this chart will help you to support your own culture building efforts and deepen conversations about the supports and challenges that would feel most helpful to all in collaborative contexts and professional learning environments. How we feel really matters. How we feel about each other really matters. And the culture we create together sits at the heart of it all. As these words from Ralph Waldo Emerson suggest, our actions mean so much when building a culture for growth, sometimes even more than what we can say out loud. And yet, as a developmental lens helps make clear, modeling to intentionally support growth and to help people feel trust, safety, and respect calls for our fullest selves. It requires deep wells of internal capacities as well as relational, humanistic stance toward leadership that reaches beyond traditional managerial approaches. Modeling the capacities we hope to help others grow toward is another powerful way we can support change and internal capacity building throughout our school systems. Although there are many capacities and qualities worth modeling in our schools and systems, two emerge as essential when it comes to shaping growth-enhancing cultures. First of all, those that are related to growing and showing ourselves. And then second, those related to welcoming and supporting others. For educators at every level of the system, the biggest gift we have to give is the gift of ourselves. When we have the courage to show who we are personally, professionally, culturally, and developmentally, along with our most sensitive and vulnerable growing edges, we empower others to show up as well. So when reflecting on the qualities needed to show and grow ourselves, Ellie Drago-Severson recommends that we think about things like vulnerability, authenticity, transparency, and courage. Stepping forward into such a brave way is not always easy, especially in the world of education where we now run as fast as we can. So by way of example, I want to share the story of Octavia. Octavia is a mid-career principal in an urban elementary school. She is committed to the issues of social justice and educational equity. She puts in long hours at her school, often even not just each day, but often over weekends as well. and she holds tightly to the reins of all curricular and professional development initiatives. "There's no time to waste," she would often say, and she's extremely proud of her reputation of holding high expectations for her staff. Yet, Octavia confided to her professional coach that she was struggling to translate her vision for building equity into the safe, trusting culture she knew would be best for her staff and students. "When I ask for input and voice at faculty meetings, I hear crickets," she lamented, and she wondered what more she could do to get feedback and deep involvement from her staff. "I know the teachers care and I know they work hard, but they won't tell me what they're thinking." Now, knowing that Octavia, being a workaholic and self-authoring, intense person, her coach recognized the opportunity to ask a question that would both support and challenge her. "Do you think your teachers really know how much you want and need their help?" the coach asked gently. Octavia replied, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." As it turned out, this question and the consequent perspective taking affected a momentous shift, and it moved Octavia towards greater transparency, vulnerability, and authenticity. She began to invite her teachers behind the curtain of her thought and work processes. This was hard at first. For instance, instead of sharing only the glossy, polished versions of her ideas, she dropped her mask and acknowledged some uncertainty and ambiguity about some of her decisions and invited colleagues to think collaboratively with her early in the process. She was upfront, too, about how much she wanted to improve the culture of the school and how much she valued her teachers' contributions. Increasingly, when teachers felt that Octavia genuinely wanted their input and when they recognized her as a fellow traveler in learning, it created a completely different kind of holding environment for connection and communication. Later, Octavia reflected that this shift towards authenticity and transparency changed everything in the culture of the school. We started thinking together about our collective strengths and challenges, and we talked openly about the ways we were and were not working as a team. It's definitely a process, and it's going to take time, but we're getting there. Octavia's story illustrates that there's great strength in vulnerability and real promise in sharing more of who and where we are at a given moment in time. Modeling that we are all learning and sharing our honest thinking and areas for growth is one of the most powerful ways we can build a growth-enhancing culture that will support increased perspective-taking, critical reflection, and lead to meaningful change. Despite the internal and external challenges to authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency, research raises up the promise of shifting our collective focus from concealing growing edges to working on them. Modeling a commitment to self-development and growth can help us to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we are less confident about, and we all have those. The aspects of others in the world we're less familiar with, and the promise of working on these gaps. In the end, pretending that our growing edges do not exist only gives them more weight in our lives. There are many ways, big and small, to model vulnerability, authenticity, transparency, and courage. One powerful practice is to prioritize these elements in our professional culture by developing what we call norms, living norms. And by living norms, we mean norms that are open to adjustment and change, as well as norms that we can aspire to live by. Rather than being something a group or a team develops once and puts in a file folder, living norms address authentic issues and are periodically revisited and tweaked in light of the group's evolving needs. Many leading educators across different levels of the system have shared that developing such real norms, norms that really matter, is not always an easy process. And yet, they report that doing so makes collaboration better, more authentic, and meaningful. And although there's no such thing as a perfect list of norms, the chart on this page offers a sample set for you to consider. Vulnerability, authenticity, transparency, and courage are not just about showing and growing ourselves. An equally important and complementary counterpoint we need to think about is that we need to welcome others into our lives and our leadership roles, and we need to bring people together in meaningful ways that support the preconditions, mutual development, and system-wide growth. Sharing oneself also means recognizing and honoring the selfhood in others. When thinking about capacities, leadership capacities in particular, that support growth-oriented cultures, we find terms like care, appreciation, and inclusiveness. These are interpersonal nuances, and they can help us infuse the preconditions of trust, safety, and respect into our teams, our schools, our communities, our organizational cultures. Let me be clear, there is no one right way to be caring, welcoming, or appreciative, just as there's no one right way to feel cared for, welcomed, or appreciated. We all bring diverse preferences, experiences, personalities, backgrounds, cultures, and ways of knowing to the table. And so we may want to consider, first, simply mean it. There is nothing more off-putting than insincerity. And second, think about adopting a learning stance, one that would feel best to everyone else. Being yourself and valuing others are really two sides of the same coin. So perhaps we need to think about developing welcoming ways that feel authentic to us and that also respond to the diverse hopes, needs, cultures, and developmental orientations of the adults in our care. The best organizations and the best organizational cultures invite and empower all people to grow, share, and contribute. They don't assume that we should act in a certain way. Actually, then, we get to stand as co-learners right beside the people that we are leading and learning about. To help you think a little bit more about ways to demonstrate care, appreciation, and a welcoming stance in your own particular context, you may want to consider the following research-based strategies that you could adopt or even adapt with diverse adults to build a growth-oriented culture together. In addition to the transformational power of care and appreciation, I do want to add a special note about inclusiveness as a global principle. Although care and gratitude can absolutely help stakeholders feel included, we have to always think about how to help even more people feel valued, seen, and heard. For instance, how, as future leaders, can you make sure that all of your teachers, staff, students, and families feel welcomed and valued? How can you build more meaningful connections across organizational roles and lines of difference? Even well-intentioned efforts to open up ourselves, our leadership, and our professional culture to others can fall short, and sometimes we, or others, may not yet have developed the internal capacities needed to lead and learn in these ways. Other times, it may be the ingrained culture of an organization or system that gets in the way of contributions from different stakeholders. Taking a broader perspective on capacities and culture can help us to be more intentional about the culture-building steps we take. It can be all too easy to limit our inclusive strategies in ways that unintentionally leave people out. And this seems especially important to keep in mind and to challenge in light of the unfair opportunity gaps already affecting too many students, families, and educators. We know that each of us has different strengths, limitations, gifts, and growing edges, to use Drago-Severson's term. We believe, or at least I believe, that everyone is special and is important. I think we're all high potential. We all deserve to belong, no matter our demographics, professional role, years of experience, learning style, or way of knowing. Embracing this knowledge makes us more, and really modeling it in our interactions with colleagues, administrators, students, families, community members, stakeholders throughout the system, and even ourselves, may be one of the most high potential strategies for building growth-oriented cultures and holding environments for change.